Want help to grow your business? Download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.
Hello and welcome to Empire Builders. They say you make your money in property when you buy it, but what price should you be paying for it? It's not quite as simple as asking an agent for the price and deducting 10 or 20,000 and thinking you've got a bargain. So joining me today is Jason Field, CEO of National Property Valuers New South Wales. Good to see you, Jason.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me here.
Now, valuers are someone I use, and obviously I use you kind of 50 or 100 times a year, so I'm kind of all up on it, and I think it's the biggest tip in property is to always use a valuer. A lot of people have got no idea what a valuer is, so do you want to explain to the viewers what you do?
Sure. Thanks so much. So a valuer looks at a property, goes inside it, looks at everything that's sold in the area, and provides an opinion, and an accurate opinion as to what that property is worth, as well as providing additional information which the buyer may not be aware of. And that's what makes it so important, and then empowers the buyer to make an informed decision, hopefully tells the buyer something he didn't know before.
Now, if I go and hire you, the whole idea is that it's completely independent, and so you've got no bias as to who the vendor is or the lender or anything like that. Is if I'm hiring you and I'm paying your bill, your loyalties are to me and you're giving your best opinion on what that property's worth.
Correct. It's completely impartial, without the emotional elements, completely objective, and exactly giving you what I honestly believe is the accurate figure and what the property is worth.
Now, most people would assume that there's one price for a property and that's the price. But you can get asked for valuations for lots of different reasons, can't you? And you could actually come up with lots of different amounts. Can you give me some of the examples on why you might come up with different amounts for for the same property?
Sure. I think it's a bit like economics. You can ask 6 opinions, economists, and you get 7 opinions. For evaluation, there are various purposes. So it might be for mortgage, stamp duty, capital gains tax, probate, family law, pre-sale or pre-purchase advice, litigation. There's any number of land tax. There's any number of reasons why people may get a property valued. That can have an impact on the valuation as well, and the scope of due diligence and the end result.
And so again, I guess that one of the main reasons for people would say, well, if you sold a property at a fire sale and you literally had 24 hours to sell it, you're going to sell it for a different price than if you spent $10,000 or $20,000 advertising it, you had 3 months to sell it and you hired the best agent in the country.
Normally that would be the case, correct.
So that's why there's different things on valuations.
Absolutely, and timing's one of those important criteria, is how long do you have to sell it.
Yeah, and again, I guess for the right type of property, that a $10 million property I assume could be worth 12 million one day and 8 million the next, depending on who the buyer is, and a 500 grand property might be worth 500 grand every day of the week.
Correct, absolutely, spot on.
So certainly there's different volatilities depending on geographics of where you're selling the property and the price point.
Correct, and the cheaper the price point, the less subjective it is.
Sure. Now also there's different types of valuations, isn't there? There's a drive-by, which sounds as a pretty dangerous thing if you're in dodgy parts of town. There's full valuations, there's online valuations. Mm-hmm. Can you explain some of those terminology and when you might use those things? Sure.
So start with, in the simplest form, a desktop is where the valuer doesn't even do a drive-by. So it's, call it an estimate or guesstimate from his office, looking at what he can from the computer. Certainly not something that I would recommend at all. Then there's a drive-by, but it's where the valuer doesn't have the benefit of going inside the property. So again, making a number of assumptions which can obviously impact on the valuation figure. To do it properly means going inside the property, and even then it can be categorised into short form and long form reports. In doing it properly though, it's essential the value goes inside the property, and then he knows what he's valuing, he can make an informed decision.
And obviously there's going to be different price points for those kind of things. So like in the drive-by, just like a drive-by shooting, quite often they don't even stop, they don't even look around the property necessarily, they keep driving past. So I guess, say for some of the online or the desktop valuations, because people can do those themselves, can't they, the desktop ones? Mm-hmm. Effectively, they can go off and maybe pay $50 and get a valuation. But again, I guess the big downside is if someone's just spent 100 grand doing up the property, or alternatively, if the local hoodlums have just gone and trashed the property, there's no way the computer's going to understand, is there?
Not a chance. It can't understand some of these elements or the emotional factors. It may not be able to take in certain idiosyncratic and intrinsic elements, what may have just sold next door in the same street, what may have been proposed to be developed next door. It's a rough ballpark, but in saying that, it's a yardstick, it's a benchmark, but it's not what I would describe as enough information to make an accurate decision. There's no substitute for going inside the property and doing the homework properly. Anything less, when you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, there's too much riding on it to be taking shortcuts. It's not the time and place to be worrying about a few $100s on a valuation.
And look, with virtually all the interviews that we've done for this this show, we're always talking about kind of the mentality of investing, and the typical investor or typical amateur having a false economy. So they'll say, I'll save $500 on the valuation and I can work out the price. But they don't realise on $1 million property it could be swaying 50 or 100 grand. So again, is those kind of online valuations could cost you maybe $25 to $50. Maybe the bank spends a couple of hundred doing a valuation that's maybe 2 pages long and a few comparables, whereas a good valuation might be 500 or 1,000. But if you're doing 10 or 15 comparisons, surely paying the $500 or $1,000 is going to give you a more accurate opinion on what that property is really worth.
100%. It gives you, it's objective, it gives you peace of mind. It's been carried out by a professional who may tell you something that you had no idea before, and that may make your decision, should you buy it or should you not buy it. That kind of information is power, and it's worth every cent. In the scheme of things, it's immaterial when spending hundreds of thousands of dollars or spending $1 million to buy a property, especially in Sydney. The cost is almost insignificant compared with what it actually brings to the table.
And again, the level of detail, because I know in a lot of your reports when you're looking at units, you'll actually order the strata reports to actually see what physically is on there, because the valuer general, he may have, this was a 2-bedroom unit that was 100 square metres, but if you actually go back and check the details, you may actually find it's something completely different to what the agents reported, for instance.
Correct, because what gets reported may include balconies, it may exclude the balconies, it may include parking. So those areas sometimes can be misleading or may not show the full picture. It's imperative to have those strata plans as well as the strata reports, so you can actually have a full appreciation of not just what you're actually buying or valuing, but also the specific details of everything else in the area that may have sold recently as well.
Now, whether rightly or wrongly, valuers, say from an outsider's perspective, tend to have the reputation of being conservative. Would you necessarily agree with that, or is that just part and parcel that quite often you're looking from a lender's perspective, that you're saying, well, if you're lending $1 million on this, we need to make sure that you can sell this $1 million every day of the week?
Well, look, there's, I guess, 2 schools of thought on this. There's an old saying, nothing affects value like ownership. So how an owner might look at it may be different to what it possibly could achieve on a good day. What a value might be a bit more realistic. What do they think the property should realistically achieve? Now, that figure should be the correct market value. Unfortunately, the tendency may be to be perceived as being somewhat or slightly conservative in terms of prudent risk management, but essentially, I know from my point, it's certainly not necessary, and it's meant there to give the banks and the clients the right number and the accurate and the correct figure.
And I guess, I mean, I'm glad that you do your job rather than me. I'd hate to be in your position, nothing personal, because say in a rapidly rising market and you've got a property worth $1 million, if you've got 2 neighbours fighting over it because they know if they could put 2 plus 2, that might actually equal 5 to them, they can potentially pay $1.2 million for that property and think they've got an absolute bargain, versus someone that lives down the street that's got no connection, it's only worth $1 million to them. So it must be very, very hard to realise what potentially the property is worth to all the various different interested parties.
It is challenging sometimes, but it also means understanding the local market, understanding the background behind each and every one of these sales. And that's where the skill of the valuer comes in, and what they add in terms of add value to the buyer or the decision maker who's actually buying the property or lending on the property, etc. It's far more than just a figure, but it's also understanding the local market and also who would be the likely buyer and what that property would probably sell, and who would be the likely buyer and what they would pay for it. And yes, it could be worth different amounts to different people.
And I guess what's maybe the margin of error or the margin that you might put in there? So, for instance, say there was a $500,000 unit and you paid $500,000 and then suddenly a valuer comes from interstate or from out of town. He says, no, that's only worth $490 or something like that. Can you effectively ever really value a property within $10,000?
Not that good, Chris. I'm certainly not. Wouldn't claim to be. It's an opinion, and it's as much science as it is art, and vice versa. And it is subjective. And yes, it's meant to be accurate, but to suggest it's worth $490 or $500, I don't think anyone can be that accurate. I guess the market will decide at the auction what it's really worth, and even then, the question sometimes is, did someone pay too much, or did they buy a bargain and buy well? So, but I think the market's generally 99 times out of 100 is probably the best test of what the property is really worth when it's actually sold.
So as a property investor, having a valuation is probably one of the most important things I think you can do, and it's almost a guarantee that you're not going to get ripped off. But just as Jason said, it's not an exact science, and there is different things that can happen on different days. So you've got to take a long-term view in property, because look, who knows what's going to happen, and if you've got a 30-year outlook, then whatever happens tomorrow doesn't make as much difference. Anyway, we'll be back after the break with some more tips on getting valuations. Welcome back to the show. Today we're joined by Jason Phil from National Property Valuers New South Wales, and we're talking about how to make the most money out of property. So as well as buying at the right price, you need to be able to sell at the right price, or at least get it revalued by the bank at the right price, so you can then pull out the equity. So what is the kind of perfect property that will get you that premium price? So welcome back to the show, Jason. So we've got the 7 Ps to get you a premium price for a property, and that's what we want to try and attract. So what's number one?
Number one would be position. I guess the old adage, location, location, location. First and foremost, it's making sure buying, whether it's to live in or as an investment, buying in the right area, one that's in demand, or where you think the infrastructure is going to be positive, where there are people wanting to rent and to live there, where you think there'll be capital growth. That to me is key.
And this is the international thing, isn't it? They use those 3 kind of location words all the time, because they just know it's like gold dust. If you get the right property in the right location, someone's always going to want it.
Correct. And if the location's wrong, then it's always going to be very hard to sell it, and buyers are always going to have an element of resistance.
To continue enjoying this presentation, download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.